Welcome back to Chaos Corner. It's your old buddy, the Guardian of Chaos, Big Daddy, and I tell it like it is. I'll say that to say this. Same day coverage, live to tape, here for show number 37, 20 feet below the surface of the Earth, down in the bunker. You can see that all the solar energy and the Wi-Fi and the cable connections are coming through loud and clear right now, here in Chaos Corner. Let me just lower the distraction here. The solar energy may not be working in Texas, but it's working down here in the bunker. Fans, we've been here now the last 3 days in a row. We're pumping out a lot of content, a lot of great information. We're back here today covering the complete idiot's guide to pro wrestling. We're delving into it further. If you remember on show number 36, which was just yesterday, we covered Chapter 1, and I'll review a couple of things, and we're heading into Chapter 2 today, a brief history of pro wrestling. Now, fans, I want you to follow me on all social media platforms, which is right now on the Guardian of Chaos YouTube for Chaos Corner. Follow me on Twitter at BigDaddyGOC, and if you hit my profile link on there, that'll bounce you over to here on YouTube. Follow me on Instagram, on Facebook, on DLive, on Rumble, which I don't really like to debate people. I said that yesterday, but I guess we can get into a conversation. Parler is coming back. There's huge announcements. And now I don't know what's going on with my new social media platform of Gab. I hear a lot of things. It was taken down. I hear Trump may be getting on there or buying it out. I don't know what's happened, but follow me on Gab. Also, over at Twitch. And if you want to follow me on Instagram, it's at Guardian of Chaos. So different things. Follow my boys at the show, and that's at Mario_Chaos. They're there to put you over, to give you the rub. So hang out here. The Complete Idiot's Guide is coming up. Show number 37. I'll say that to say this. Don't you dare miss it. All right, fans. Welcome back here. Show number 37. You see we're pumping out the content. We covered yesterday Chapter 1 of A Complete Idiot's Guide to Pro Wrestling by Captain Lou Albano and Bert Randolph Sugar from 1999. So go back and it was well received yesterday, show number 36. Pardon the pun. I'll quote Bully Ray later on. So that's what we're going to get into here. So I'm glad you're here. It's a Saturday afternoon. This is live to tape. There's no edit button. It's unique. It's unscripted. It's organic. It's ad lib. It's whatever I come up with to present to you for content creativity. And then I, in turn, watch you guys because you inspire me to put out this content and this history, whether it's covering the current product, which with the Elimination Chamber coming up tomorrow night, and then all the good stuff going on in AEW Dynamite, merging with Impact possibly, New Japan, who knows what's going on with the NWA. MLW is on fire, as is Ring of Honor. There's a lot of things going out there. And of course, locally, here in the shadows of Titan Towers, Paradise Alley Pro Wrestling has a big event coming up next weekend that will be live on iPay-per-view, and we'll cover that this week. But I'm here to get into Chapter 2, a brief history of wrestling. Yesterday we covered this crazy world called pro wrestling, and I gave you the sidebars that we covered yesterday. Captain Lou's Corner, Bert's Corner, In Your Face, WrestleMania, all the different sidebars here at the book, Body Slam, that we present to you here at the fans. So if you get a chance to go out, this was 21 years ago, as I said yesterday, but it applies to today, and I feel like, and I know that I lived this, and that's why this is it's so important. I told you, I've lent it out 150 times. I've read it a handful of times in the last a handful of years, and probably 100 times altogether since I've had this book. So if you get a chance to go out and get it, I think I mentioned who the printers and the authors were. It's Alpha Books. They're out of New York, a division of Macmillan General Reference. I don't want to say Simon & Schuster. There's enough issues going out there with politics and social justice and the government. Let's not cover that here on Chaos Corner. I try to avoid that. We try to stay with positivity. You know that. So, again, I read the foreword yesterday from Goldberg, and then I went on to read some personal views and viewpoints from Bert, Randolph, Sugar, and Captain Lou, and the people that have contributed to this book, and it's unbelievable read. I did send it out to several members at the Cauliflower Alley Club, and I've gotten a big response on this to the New England Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame. Different folks. David LaGreca at Busted Open Radio. Dave, I'm not sure if you've gotten back to me yet. I haven't checked, but I'm sure I'll be checking in with you on Busted Open Radio this week. So we're going to get on to Chapter 2. We'll probably be here for about an hour. Leave a comment, spread the word, get us in the algorithm, a thumbs up, a thumbs down. It doesn't matter. Just make sure you spread the word, hit the notifications on here. Hey, listen, we got over 100 subscribers now. Wow, who knew? If I could only transfer all of my social media followers. Now, listen, I'm new at this stuff. I'm new at the technical stuff, having a lot of different issues, but we're upgrading. We're getting power boosters. We're getting all that together. I want to thank the folks over at WWAB, and I want to thank the folks over at Wrestle Council. You've given me a lot of help, and I greatly appreciate it. Of course, obviously, the professor at PWZ Podcast, too, and I want to mention the people, and I'll get on to that later. So we're gonna delve right into this. I usually do a 10-minute, 15-minute open monologue, but we're going to switch past this. And tonight, before I get on to getting into the complete idiot's guide of pro wrestling, the green room is on at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time tonight. Everybody is going to be on Wrestling with Anything But on Facebook Live, on Twitch, on all social media platforms, on Discord, and on Apple Podcasts. It's going to be live for a couple of hours. They're in the middle of the trials for who's going to be on the green room, whether it be David Holliday, Howard Collado, Mickey Doyle. We know that Mike Duke the Dumpster Drosy is the judge. We know Avi Klein is over the proceedings. We know Mario Mancini's the lead prosecutor. They have Mindy. They have a whole bunch of other people that have been involved with this. And now tonight, I believe everybody from Del Wilkes to Ray Lloyd to Duke the Dumpster Drosy to Bill DeMott to Paul Roma to Don Morocco to maybe even Ken Patera, I believe they're all going to be on board tonight on Facebook Live. You're not going to want to miss it. So this will be up, same day coverage, as we said, live to tape. So check that out. And then, of course, tomorrow night will be Unmasking the Truth with the Patriot Del Wilkes at 8 p.m. You're not going to want to miss those shows. And I say that not to, I always give the rub and put people over, but it's to say that to turn it on to the consumers, to the fans, to the people out there in the IWC that follow me. And you can spread the word because it's good for all of us that are insiders, outsiders, fans, marks, jabronis, whatever you want to call it, because you're learning about the business. And it's not just pro wrestling. Wrestling with anything but. It's life, it's realities, it's heroes, it's regular people. I watched Road to Recovery last night with Duke the Dumpster Drosy, Mike Drosy, and what he does and his fan base and the people in recovery and the things they've overcome from addiction. If you don't watch that alone and what he's doing, I don't know what the hell to tell you. That's why I tell you, if you don't follow Mario and Chaos over at the show, to put yourself over and get the rub and the brand, that's what we're here to do in this community, is to help each other, to give back. That's what it's all about. And that's why I'm turning you on to the people who have turned me on. And that's what we do here. So, I mean, I got the halls. It's middle of winter here. Although, thank God, as I said, it's sunny out these next couple of days. Pending storm on Monday, who knows? But then it's supposed to get up to like 50 degrees. Hey, listen, I'm not down in Key West. I'm not out with Don Morocco out at the islands. We live here in the Northeast corridor where it's a rat race every day. We're coming up on almost 10 minutes. Live to tape, same day coverage, Chaos Corner, show number 37. No offense to anyone. Let's get into the complete idiot's guide of pro wrestling. And again, as I did for Chapter 1 on yesterday's show, and you go back and check it out, I'm going to do the same thing here on Chapter 2. I gave you a quick view of it yesterday. We'll do the same thing today. Again, the cover fans, I implore you, do not miss the boat on this one, okay? Excuse me, if I attach my name to it, then you know it's real, you know it's legit. You know that. There's three types of people in this world: those who don't know what happened, those who wonder what happened, and people like the Guardian of Chaos that make things happen. I say it all the time, and I'll get on to respect before we get into this. In order to get respect, you have to start with respecting yourself. Once you do that, you open up other people's minds to respecting you. Remember that. School is in session. Everybody take a seat, settle down, let's go. Open up your books, go to chapter 2. And school is in session here with Professor, the teacher, the guardian of chaos. It's me, it's me. It's the GOC. In this chapter, wrestling comes to America. Greco-Roman and catch as catch can styles. Promoters and pretense. The Carney contribution. Wrestling becomes wrestling. The first showman. That's what we're starting off with here. Once upon a time, wrestlers wrestled. I mean, really wrestled. Some historians have traced its ancestry to the ancient Egyptians, then on to the Greeks and to the Romans. I mean, wrestling seems to go all the way back to before the time of the Great Flood. But that's not the type of wrestling we're talking about here on Chaos Corner. We're talking about the body-slamming, head-bashing entertainment that has come to be known as professional wrestling, a form of entertainment that is as American as baseball and apple pie. And that wrestling has a history all its own, as you'll see in this chapter, Chapter 2, A Brief History of Wrestling. From the old to the new is where we're going to start off with. Old world wrestling was of the Greco-Roman variety, which had certain rules. No holds were allowed below the waist. And when you were one of the combatants that hit the ground, holds were allowed below, again, I said holds were allowed below the waist. And when the combatants hit the ground, it constituted a fall as we know it. In contrast to this long hair variety was the more commercial form of wrestling, like the matches that used to be held in old German beer gardens. You know what I'm talking about here. Remember the time frame of when the book was written and when we go back to. All through scientific and nature, the main idea of these wrestling exhibitions was to sell beer. And I guess I'll get it out of the way. I said exhibitions instead of exhibitions. You know what, Bully Ray, the two-time Hall of Famer, perhaps the best tag team wrestler of all time, a co-host of Busted Open Radio, Team 3D, the Dudley Boys, said to me on at least of a couple of occasions, probably about 20 years ago, maybe 18, give the Guardian of Chaos 6 spots and he'll screw up 5 of them. I'm trying to cut down on my cussing. I've been $20 every time I swear. You know how much I've contributed to my granddaughter's college fund already? Let's not get crazy. So the original concept of it was to sell beer over at the beer gardens when it comes to pro wrestling. So you see the history, scientific in nature, really. Let's move forward. The longer an exhibition match lasted, the more beer in the beer garden sold. I mean, it makes sense. And so the two wrestlers would lock each other in their arms and stay in one position for 30, 40 minutes or more. Then one would straighten his arms slowly, flex his muscles ever so slightly. The customers would go wild and celebrate this victory by ordering more beer. Cheers. Finally, when the wrestlers got thirsty, one would be thrown to the ground with a mighty thud and they would rest and drink for 30 minutes or so, and so on, through the long, wet night lasting 5, 6 hours. That's like some of the indie shows, they run now, or some of the pay-per-views for WWE. So you see the concept and where it goes back and how it started. Before I move on to the Carney connection, this is why this show number 37 of Chaos Corner, was so important to follow up on yesterday's show. We may be here every day over the next several weeks until we get through this. We'll see how it works out. Here's the first sidebar segment that I talked about to open up the show and that we covered yesterday. Fighting words. Old world wrestling is called scientific, meaning it was based upon specific holds, moves, rules, and skills to distinguish it from the choreographed, entertainment-oriented style that developed into modern pro wrestling. It makes sense. Here's the Carney connection. When wrestling was brought to American shores by German and Irish immigrants, there's that word. Politics always creeps into it. We're all immigrants, I guess, at one point. Just have to do it legally. I digress, and I'll say that to say this. It was given a new world twist. Beginning in the post-Civil War period, wrestling bouts were staged at country fairs, don't I know it, or touring carnivals and at shows, short for athletic shows. That's right. Trivia question. Anyone? Anyone? Bueller? Bueller? At shows, short for athletic shows, were wrestlers with colorful costumes, equally colorful nicknames, and fictionalized biographies, which that's the only part I don't fit because mine is true. There's no, that's not scripted. I lived it. Fictionalized biographies would wrestle each other to accept challenges from all local comers. This is where we talked about, we covered on the show yesterday, show 36. We covered carnies and the word carny and where it came from and how it intertwines with pro wrestling. And that really is, if you look at it, the true history, as we learning here from the beer gardens and then back to Luthez and all that in the early 19th century. We're learning the history here of pro wrestling. So that's where the Carney connection comes in, and I'm going to continue with that, but I want to get on to the next sidebar, WrestleMania. So keep that Carney thought, and if I have to review the Carney connection, we'll go back to it. According to wrestling writer Joe Jarris, Vermont was, in the early 1700s, America's first hotbed of pro wrestling. I'll say it again. Vermont, in the northeast New England area, in the early 1700s, was the first hotbed of professional wrestling. Most popular was the Irish collar and elbow style. Do you get it? Collar and elbow, tees, companies, and of course, when you lock up, I say it all the time in my commentary for different groups and throughout the history, a beautiful collar and elbow. It's the basics of 101. That's what you learn at PAPW, Paradise Alley Pro Wrestling, in which each wrestler would start by placing one hand on his opponent's shoulder on or near the collar line, the other hand on the arm above the elbow. Just step down and finger me collar. I double dare you was a typical challenge. Do you understand what I'm saying? You know what I'm talking about? So that's the first sidebar from WrestleMania. Back to the Carney connection. The Carney at shows, again, remember Bueller? Anyone? Athletic shows featured wrestlers engaging in exhibition matches or challenging all comers from the audience in time limit contests for money. Say $25, which is what some of the guys still get paid today, but you get the gist. The challenger could win in one of two ways: by pinning the star or by managing to stay in the ring with him for 15 minutes. Typical 15-minute, coming down the aisle with this bout with a 15-minute time limit. Bingo, History 101 here at Chaos Corner. For the star, evading the pin was easy. All he had to do was remain on the defensive for the entire time limit. But staying the limit raised the real risk that the carnival operator could lose money if the local favorite, or local yokel, as he was called, managed to go the distance. And if you've seen the movie Body Slam with Dirk Benedict and the late great Rowdy Roddy Piper, Captain Lou Albano, the Tonga Kid, one of the Samoans, unbelievable movie in history. And this is exactly what they covered. Even the legendary midget Billy Barty was there at one time. And I'm not going to say anything politically correct. I don't want to sing "Short people have, no, you gotta pick him up just to say hello." No, we're not going there. But if you go and see that movie, even though it was a movie, it was based upon the same concept. Great movie. Go out and see it from the 80s. So that's the Carney connection. Here we go with hookers and hoaxes. Still the Carney connection here in pro wrestling. The carnies who lived by their wits employed all sorts of tricks to avoid paying the money to the local heroes. They paid an operative to hide behind a curtain at the back of the ring, ready with a baseball bat to take out the challenger. Or they employed hookers. Hooks, not the traditional you see on a street corner. Again, do your research and homework. You know what a hooker is if you're a pro wrestling fan. You want me to break it down in layman's terms for the people, not my regulars? I love you all. A shooter, a hooker, same thing. Harley race type. You guys get the picture, okay? Wrestlers who, using crippling holds, unknown or illegal in competitive matches, put an end to the challenge before the local could sting the carnival. If the local was good enough to stay with the carny wrestler, the hooker would maneuver him into a backup, where he would be whacked on the head with a 2x4 by a Confederate, ending his daredeviltry and preserving the carnival's money. Those were a lot of different things, and that's if you go back and look at the history of wrestlers that I mentioned, whether it be in the beginning with Lou Thez and Carl Gotch, and back to the days of the early 1900s. Those were the guys that Ed Strangler, Lewis, and Stanislaus Zabisco, and different guys like that, Ed Don George, Jim Londos. Those were guys that were considered, maybe a Bronco Nagurski. I already talked about Thez and Harley Race and Danny Hahn. Kurt Angle, those are guys that are shooters, that are hookers for real, and not the streetwalker. So that's what happened for real back in Kearney. And again, I told you, I went and I watched P.T. Barnum, the latest version of 2017. Pretty accurate, pretty good stuff. We're 20 minutes in here. Show number 37, down here at the bunker with Chaos Corner. And I'll say that to say this because I have to give a big shout out. Because again, with the weather like this, today I have it on both knees, the right shoulder, the top of the trapezius, and the lower back. I've been hitting the gym, trying to get in shape. And I owe big thanks to my buddy, Mr. Hempel-Stilskin, and the fellas over at Sweet Heel CBD at sweetheel.com. New branding, new website. Like I said, go out for all your CBD needs, whether it be oil, life, tinctures, wellness, balms, edibles, soap, shampoo, all different styles. It's a lifestyle, and there's different products. And if you go to Sweet Heel CBD, and I break it down and explain it in several different ways, you'll understand what I'm talking about. And again, I don't attach myself to anything that doesn't work. And being a former retired behind the walls, 25 years, former bounty hunter, repo man, private investigator, actor, private security, bodyguard, pro wrestling manager, more injuries than you can imagine. What keeps me going and hitting the gym and working out is stuff like CBD and Sweet Heel CBD. So go see my buddy, Mr. Hempel-Stilskin. That's a shoot. That's a hooker. That's legit. I wanted to put that out there. So we're 20 minutes in. Let's continue here with The Complete Idiot's Guide to Pro Wrestling, Captain Lou Albano and Bert Randolph Sugar. Okay, here we go. Bert's Corner at this point. In the old days, there were three classes of wrestlers. The hookers were the most proficient, like I said, the shooters. An able wrestler with wrestling knowledge, ability, and strength, and with a bag full of old carnival hooks in his repertoire. The shooter was a scientific and competitive wrestler, and the journeyman was the largest group performers who could wrestle just a little. Now, you see, they're saying there's a difference between a hooker and a shooter. And I'll explain that right now. Back in the early 19th century, and those gentlemen that I mentioned, and the carnivals, before they went to the wayside, and how the business started and where it developed from, they were called hookers, by hook or by crook. You get it. They would injure you. They would use a 2x4. They would use a chair. They would hide in the weeds. That was a hooker. And then they call here someone a shooter who was a scientific and competitive grappler. That's what we call in the 70s and 80s and your Harley Races and guys like that are legit, that you can say they're a hooker. They wouldn't do anything underhanded, but that's the same walking the line of a hooker and a shooter from my world, my explanation. This book, I don't have to agree with it. I lived it. I went through it. I can respect your opinion and yours. Leave a comment. That's my definition. I'm giving you Bert's Corner, putting it in with Chaos Corner. And now we're going to go to Captain Lou's Corner. Besides Washington, Lincoln and Teddy Roosevelt, although... Do you see what Bully Ray meant? Unedited, live. I'm not going to go back and chop this up. You're going to see me in full form. At least it wasn't from a heckler. Captain Lou's Corner, take two. Besides Washington, Lincoln and Teddy Roosevelt, other presidents who wrestled included Zachary Taylor, William Howard Taft, and Calvin Coolidge. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 presidents that have wrestled. It shows you the history of pro wrestling and where it's been and how far it goes back. And let's put in number 7, who's in the WWE Hall of Fame, and I mentioned it yesterday, and that would be the former president, Donald Trump. And if you go back to WrestleMania, again, no one's left a comment yet. There were a lot of comments left on yesterday's program, yesterday's show, yesterday's episode. Do the same today. 23 or 24 WrestleMania with Trump, McMahon, the hair match on Monday Night Raw. Let's see how good you guys are at the research. I want to see. This is why I throw the challenge out there. So how about that for presidents in the world of pro wrestling? Back to the Carney connection. Barnstorming brouhahas. Brouhaha. At approximately the same time that the carnivals traveled the highways and byways of the 19th century America, wrestling barnstormers were traveling the back roads, working by hook and crook, as I just said, to shake money out of the rubes. I should know, I did it for 25 years and it was my second job. That's right, as a manager, I got paid as a living, as an independent in the 90s into the 2000s and made a living as my second job. So let's remember that. We talked about that. Who was that you? What was that? I just like to throw that out there because comments, people request, emails. Again, I'll give that information out later to get in touch with me. They promoted money matches for themselves against the local strongmen wherever and whenever they could find them, making side bets with the town folk on the outcome. There were a lot of convenience, sometimes with the willing assistance of the local hero, to make sure the underdog always won, and if done convincingly, the two could stage a rematch and sting the marks all over again. The marks. Now you get where it came from. The Barnstormers' bottom line was money, not victories, the beginnings of wrestling as a performance sport. Homesteading. Wrestling comes home to roost. Both the Carnivals and the Barnstormers had a stimulating effect on early America, not only reminding those who had left the tradition of wrestling in the old world of its existence in the new, but also bringing this new form of entertainment to the yet unexposed masses, and that would be the world of television. It was but a short hop, skip, and a pin to the next stage in wrestling's development. Matches held in small halls and saloons, much like the old German beer garden. Good stuff. In that experience, advanced men hung up posters announcing the coming of the matches and stayed in town to homestead. Get it? Promoter. Are you with me? Are you ahead of me? Did you live it? Do you know it? Can you say it? That is to promote wrestling, with both the traveling carnivals and the Barnstormers spreading the popularity of wrestling and carrying it to the masses, particularly the European immigrants, there's that word again, who had long been interested in the sport in all its forms. Wrestling was on the threshold of becoming Americanized. You see how everything's intertwined? Are you picking it up here on show 37? I think you are. Presidential power. 3 of the 4 faces of Mount Rushmore were wrestlers. Let me say it again. 3 of the 4 faces of Mount Rushmore were wrestlers. George Washington was the champion of the colony of Virginia. Teddy Roosevelt wrestled at Harvard. However, the most famous of all was Abraham Lincoln, a giant of a man, we know this, who at 6'4" was taller by far than most of the men of his day and age. Early in life, Lincoln had developed great wrestling skills and soon earned a reputation around his native Springfield, Illinois, after defeating a local street fighter named Jack Armstrong. No. Not that Jack Armstrong, the all-American boy from Hudson High in the 40s. No. But the one from Springfield circa the 1840s. The bout had been arranged by a local saloon keeper who had offered Lincoln $10 if he could throw Armstrong. Are you following me here? What history, knowledge, facts you get here on Chaos Corner. This is what you get. This is the history mixed with presidential politics. This is the things that people don't understand unless you go back. And again, Bert, Randolph, Sugar, Captain Lou Albano, what they did for research of this book, and then the photos in here by Timothy A. Walker, who I alluded to in yesterday's episode, a la Bill Apter, George Napolitano. The photos in here are enough to buy this. Back then it was only $18. Again. So I'll continue. The curious were drawn from miles around to New Salem, where Lincoln was then employed as a clerk to see the match. The betting action among the sports was brisk, most of it placed on the shorter but more powerfully built Armstrong. But once the match started, it was no contest. Lincoln lifted him by the throat, a la like a choke slam that you see now. I apologize for that. That's not really my style. That was terrible, wasn't it? Wow. Shook him like a rag and then slammed him into a hard fall. Armstrong merely shook his head and said, "He's the best feller and ever broke into the settlement." And there it was. Stories and storytellers have it that Lincoln was engaged in a wrestling match when couriers came to tell him in 1860 of his nomination for the presidency by the Republican convention. How about that? Let's get on to, before I finish up with presidential power here on A Complete Idiot's Guide into the World of Pro Wrestling, let me get on to another sidebar of WrestleMania. By the 1880s, Greco-Roman wrestling was all the rage. It was a style developed in Europe by the 1860s and America's a decade or so later. But truth to tell, the Greco-Roman style of this period had little similarity to the classic style of the early Greeks and Romans. To source a fall in Greco-Roman, a wrestler had to throw his opponent. To that, his two shoulders touched the mat simultaneously, as we know, simultaneously. Neither tripping nor holds below the waist were allowed. See the difference? This form, called long hair wrestling by some of the older wrestlers like Lou Thez, persists today in a modified form as an Olympic sport. So now you see the difference of how, whether it be currently someone like a Gable or a Shelton Benjamin or Brock Lesnar, Kurt Angle, and all the different guys, and why they have the form and the background and the wrestling that they do. I can go back to guys like Brad Rangans and Olympic grapplers like that have this background, and you can see the difference between the American style of Greco-Roman, after I read this and then explain it to you, because I've read this before, but to read it and to relay it to you and then to break it down on how I feel about it is what I'm trying to do here with the book. Long hair wrestling is what they compared, is what they call it now. So that's the difference between what they're breaking down here. The early Greeks and Romans and the Greco-Roman style, which we're all familiar with. It's all research that you can put out there. Back to presidential power. Have I taken a break yet? I don't think I have, but again, you know I'm not crazy on dead air. I'm glad that you're here. It's unbelievable on a weekend. Again, I guess I'll be here tomorrow before the pay-per-view. Ooh, and you know what? I could smell the food cooking upstairs in Chaos headquarters. Unbelievable what's going to happen later on today with the spread that we're putting out here at the homestead, which is what? Anyone? Bueller Homestead, a la Homesteader, promoter back in the day. That's where it came from. Back to presidential power. Thanks for hanging with me. We're 33 minutes in here. This is flying by because the monologue was a little shorter. Again, show number 37, live to tape, same day coverage. I appreciate everyone being here. I love you guys, you know that. Wrestling's early days were marked by intermittent bouts, including one in 1881 between William Muldoon, who claimed to be the champion, and Clarence Whistler, the wonder of the West, at New York's Terrence Garden Theater, of all places. For nearly 7 hours, the two huffed and puffed as first one and then the other got down on the carpet and attempted to turn the canvas. They called it the carpet. It's the canvas nowadays, and attempted to turn the other over on his back or locked hands behind heads in Greco-Roman style. Get it? Not a collar and elbow. That's what we're talking about. Marked by constant cries, "If I want my dollar back," and "get up and do something." The fans. Even back in the 1800s. Finally, at about 4 o'clock in the morning, with most of the spectators at the theater bar in the outer lobby, that's where I would have been. Well, maybe not. I would have probably still been sitting ringside. The proprietor ordered the lights turned off and the crowd out, which had forgathered at 9 and previous that night, trudged out of the theater swearing and growling, according to the New York Times. Again, 4 o'clock in the morning. This is hours later. All the people in the bar, I'm sure they're half in the bag. You know how some of the audience gets. Hey, listen, we all participated in it. So the proprietor, the promoter, the venue, however you want to call it, we'll put it into today's terms. This is back in the 1800s, or why I'm breaking it down. So picture that. He hits the lights. You have been there since the earlier night at showtime, bell time, at like 8 o'clock. You're half in the bag. And then he throws everyone out, orders everybody out while you're half in the bag. They're nearly a riot. This is how the riots started back in the 19th century to things like this, and it's reported in the New York Times. That's how the history of it, and people don't realize it, all the way back to, and that's why this section here in Chapter 2, A Brief History, is called Presidential Power. Let's go to the next episode of Captain Lou's Corner. The earliest recorded wrestling match in the New World was in 1871, a match for the championship of the United States and Canada, and $2,000, $2,000. 1871, USA and Canada. It's interesting stuff in this book. That's why if you don't get it, you're missing the boat. Or if you don't tune in here for us going through this, you're definitely missing content and creativity in history and facts, which is what I present here on this show, podcast for the IWC. It was staged in Titusville, Pennsylvania. Major McLaughlin threw one Nathan Dorrance. McLaughlin proclaimed, when they say throw, Greco-Roman, remember where we're at here. McLaughlin proclaimed himself champion, issued challengers to other wrestlers to wrestle him for the title. Captain Lou's Corner. Professional wrestling's roots. Wrestling's roots were so solidly embedded in the European culture that most of the first wave of great American wrestlers was made up of first-generation Americans of European descent, most from small-town America and European immigrants. Wrestlers such as Martin Farmer Burns, William Muldoon, Theor, Bauer, Ernest Robar, Evan Strangler Lewis. They combined Greco-Roman catch as catch can with one match between Lewis and Robar in 1893, alternating for 5 falls between the two disciplines. Pretty interesting stuff. This last type of wrestling, catch as catch can, was initially popularized by Frank Gotch, who we alluded to earlier, and Tom Jenkins at the turn of the century. Again, we alluded to that earlier today. It allowed wrestlers to grasp any part of their opponent's body, and falls were scored whenever both shoulders of a wrestler touched the floor at the same time, of what we call a pin. Oh, wow, it's not rocket science. The referee shall slap on back or shoulder of the wrestler, securing the fall so that the underman will not be strained by being held too long in possibly painful position. Painful position. I didn't see that one coming. The immigrant experience continued with the second wave of American wrestlers. Here we go. Strap in. Most coming from mid-America, with wrestlers like Frank Gotch, Tom Jenkins, and Dan McLeod, joined by the Russian Lion, George Hackenschmidt, who had won international tournaments in Europe and came to the United States to defend his title. Gotch and Hackenschmidt, if you know your history and research, would put on 2 of the most celebrated bouts in wrestling history and 2 of the most controversial. Hackenschmidt and Gotch. This is stuff that I probably learned and read about 30 years ago, maybe. We're going to go on to WrestleMania before we continue to Gotch Gets the Lion. Gotch Gets the Lion. You get the headline there, right? WrestleMania. In what may have been the biggest upset in wrestling history, the peerless Frank Gotch, thought to be unbeatable, was defeated by Fred Beal when he won the 3rd of 3 falls after throwing Gotch out of the ring. Gotch striking his head on the floor when the woozy Gotch finally re-entered the ring. Beal pinned him to take the American Heavyweight Championship on December 1st, 1906, down in New Orleans, NOLA. Cajun country, if you will. WrestleMania. The first bout in the supremacy of the wrestling world was held at Chicago's Dexter Park Pavilion in 1908. It was generally believed that Hackenschmidt's bear hug and inside trip would be more than enough to make Gotch submit. However, Hack was unable to get Gotch in his grasp all evening, and was later to complain that Gotch had slathered himself in oil to make him all but impossible to grab. Now, a lot of wrestlers even did that into the early 2000s, and some still today when you put too much oil. But back then, Hackenschmidt is claiming that Gotch did it intentionally, and there's been rumors of that for years. But Gotch was an incredible grappler. Again, that's the controversy they were talking about that we were alluding to earlier. His inability to grab Gotch, coupled with Gott's continually roughhousing and fouling, finally drove Hackenschmidt to quit after 2 hours and 3 minutes. The referee had no alternative but to disqualify Hackenschmidt and award the decision and the title to Gotch. For the next 3 years, Hackenschmidt campaigned for a rematch, finally getting one in 1911 at Chicago's new Comiskey Park. In what was billed as the match of the century. I remember reading this years ago, not just from this book, from legendary historians. It might have even been my old buddy Sheldon Goldberg up at New England Championship Wrestling at NECW. Sheldon Goldberg, a true historian. Once again, foul tactics reared their ugly head, only this time it wasn't during the match itself, but beforehand. Seems that Gotch and his entourage had planted a hooker. We talked about that before, by hook or by crook, earlier from the Carnies. Ad Santel, that's the hooker, in Hackenschmidt's training camp. 3 weeks before the match, Santel purposely injured Hackenschmidt's knee, but made the injury look like an accident. What is this, Tanya Harding and Nancy Kerrigan all over again in Olympic skating? With but one leg and public prejudice running in favor of two, Hackenschmidt tried to call off the bout, but the promoters, the Homesteaders, who had already spent the advance ticket money, pleaded with him to keep his injury a secret and go ahead with the bout. The Russian Lion agreed, but only if Gotch agreed to let him win one of the 3 falls and carry him to face-saving end. Quite the deal there. Gotch double-crossed him, you knew it was coming, and pinned the helpless Hackenschmidt in 2 straight falls. Talk about the setup. Talk about the Montreal screw job. This was long before Vince McMahon's daddy's daddy was in his daddy's nutsack or a gleam in his eyes. Wait a minute. That's not a cuss word. No $20 on that one. Let's see where we go here as we're 42 minutes in. That really is unbelievable here. We're going to move on a little forward here. We got wrestling's first superstar, Paul Gallico, the famed sports writer, labeled the 1920s the golden age of sports, and placed 5 superheroes in the decade's pantheon of greats. So here we go, fans. Wrestling's first superstar, Paul Gallico, who was the famed sports writer from the 20s, the golden age of sports, and placed 5 superheroes in the decade's pantheon of greats. Here they go. And then leave your thoughts. Put yours down here because I really want to hear this. Give me your feedback. If you made it this far, and I know that you did. Babe Ruth of baseball, Red Grange of football, Jack Dempsey of boxing, Bill Tilden of tennis, and Bobby Jones of golf. Had you but added a 6th, it would have been Ed Strangler Lewis. That's right, Ed Strangler Lewis of wrestling, obviously. In fact, Lewis even looked like Ruth, fat and balding with a big chest and small, toothpick-thin legs. But nobody was even better than Lewis in the long history of pro wrestling. Fans, there's a lot to be said for that. After winning bout after bout with a monotonous regularity, usually ending the match with his signature strangulation hold from which no opponent could escape, and creating an undercurrent of displeasure among the fans, Lewis, that's right, Ed the Strangler Lewis. Remember the time frame? We're in the 1920s here, what they're calling the golden age of sports. Lewis and his brain trust, manager Billy Sandow, that's right, managers, look back at this, Ed Strangler Lewis, his manager Billy Sandow, and promoter Toots Mott. I know that you guys know this. We've read this before. I've said this before. If you're way behind on this and you're in the 21st century and you haven't done this, you're missing the boat. You don't know who paved the way before you, and that's why I'm bringing it to you, because these are the people to be made movies of and be honored and pay homage to, and where our business and industry came from. That's why they wrote this, A Complete Idiot's Guide, Captain Lou and Bert Randolph. And that's why Me being old school and being such a historian, that's why I'm bringing this to you. We circle it up like a nice little bow. I mean, that's what it's all about, right? That's what it's all about. Anybody? You get it. So we're talking about Strangler Lewis, Billy Sandow, his manager, and the promoter Toots Mott, who along with Lewis were known as the Gold Trio. That's right, they even had entourages and groups back then. The Gold Trio decided it was necessary to do business, agree to lose once in a while, to keep wrestling fans interested. But even though he was to lose the title 4 times in a career, over 6,200 matches in his long career, he was only to lose 33 times. I want you to think about that for a second. Over 6,200 matches, and he only lost 33 times. You're going to say, oh, chaos, it was a script, it was choreographed. These were hookers, these were shooters, these were regular guys, these were people that did this for a living. So it's as legit comes. Yeah, okay, they're double-crossing, they're agreeing, but you get in there and perform. You either can do it or you don't do it, and that's what I've said about this business from when I first was introduced inside as an insider in 1983, but first saw as a little boy in 1970. So that's why we're bringing this here. Think about that streak, though. The Strangler would win it back an equal number of times, most in straight shooting matches, as I just alluded to. That is, he won without tricks or prearranged agreements, solely on his skills as a wrestler. One of the Strangler's greatest matches took place in Madison Square Garden in 1933. Now you know why it's called the Mecca of pro wrestling. And once you get there, that's the pinnacle of pro wrestling, Madison Square Garden. I don't know if it's like that anymore, but you see the history and why they called the WWF back in the day New York. You worked for New York. You went to New York. Now you get it. 1933, Madison Square Garden. By then, Lewis and his long in the tooth, he almost stepped on his overbite, defending his title against Ray Steele. On this night of nights, the crowds were lined up around the block to see Lewis finally get his from the challenger, Steele. The bout began with two circling each other. Lewis, by now, fat, 50, and balding. Jeez. Sounds familiar. Looks familiar. I mean, I don't know. There's similarities, parallels there. I'm just saying, fat, 50, and balding. Steele, the body beautiful and weighing a fit, trim, lean, jacked, buffed, ripped, 220 pounds, but almost from the start, it was no contest. Steele could do nothing with the Strangler. The fans, yawning at the lack of action in this scientific bout, began to stamp their feet. Realizing he was hopelessly outclassed, Steele finally resorted to punching Lewis, and the referee disqualified him 20 minutes into the match. Interesting history, interesting trio. Toots Mott, Billy Sandow, the whole trio there of the Gold Trio. In Madison Square Garden, 1933, Ed the Strangler Lewis at the end of his career. What Steele fought as a young guy, lean, jack, buffed. I mean, you don't get stuff like this. Let's get on to a Captain Lou's Corner. Born Robert Friedrich, Ed Strangler Lewis derived his ring name from the earlier wrestler Evan Strangler Lewis, who I mentioned episodes back, as well as from his signature hold, the strangulation submission. He perfected this hold by pressing a wooden dummy between his arms and crushing it until it broke. How about that? Was I a little in character there as Big Daddy back when I was still active and managing it in the ring? Captain Lou's Corner, Ed Strangler Lewis. I mean, it doesn't get better than that. Let's get on to a Bert's Corner. Despite his enormity, Ed Strangler Lewis was extremely agile. It was high possible to get behind him as he continued circled, bear-like, to prevent his opponents from getting the drop on him. He was able to impose his will on everyone he faced when he wanted to. Bert's Corner. I think that was a misprint. No. Before you say that I mispronounced it or I fumbled on that one, I believe Bert's Corner in this edition here of the Complete Idiot's Guide of Pro Wrestling, I think there's a misprint in Bert's Corner on that one. We are coming up on 50 minutes in we're going to wrap this up so we keep it to about an hour so we can get it up and get it out. Again, we're still on chapter 1 here of this crazy world of pro wrestling, which we moved into chapter 2, a brief history of wrestling. I want to bring Wrestling Becomes Wrestling. By the time Lewis' career had wound down, the feverish 20s had been replaced by the troubled 30s. Speaking of, it's like history repeating itself right here in 2021. And the American dream, no, not Dusty Rhodes, although that is my American dream, and we're all here for the American dream. Let me not get started here. We're 50 minutes in. Stick to the task at hand, Chaos. Stay focused. Focus here. The American dream had become a nightmare as breadlines took the place of the broom and bust and boom atmosphere of the previous decade. Let me read that to you again, because it's pertinent to what's going on nowadays here in 2021 and the current situation of the state of the economy and society. And I'm trying not to get into this, but this is what's presented, so I'm going to present it to you. Wrestling becomes wrestling. By the time Lewis' career had wound down, the feverish 20s had been replaced by the troubled 30s. Kind of like the feverish 2010s had been replaced by the troubled 2020s. And the American dream had become a nightmare. COVID, social justice, politics, war, famine, immigration, education, the environment. Geez, wow. The connection. Breadlines took the place of the boom and bust atmosphere. Wall Street, the market, the crash, unemployment. Wow. That took place of the previous decade, which was in the 2010s. We were doing okay there. What was it, around 2006, 2008? Things started to where we are now. Can I do that again? Wow, I wonder how they'll put that out on YouTube. Depression-era depression. Like all other forms of entertainment, wrestling struggled for its very existence. People without enough money to fill their bellies with food had very little extra to spend on frills of extravagances like entertainment and the world of pro wrestling, like podcasts and YouTube and streamers and all that stuff, social media. Wow. Back to the future, like I said on show number 36, we're saying the same thing here on show number 37. It's funny how they always say, whether it be the Bible or historians, and I'm not trying to put any agenda out here, I'm just talking as a regular guy. It's funny how they always say history repeats itself and comes around, and it's true in anything. It's true in any business. It's true in life, relationships, friendships, history, the world, the economy, faith. It really is crazy. Still, the sport labored on with wrestlers like Dick Capt, Jim Londos, Jim Browning, and Gus Sonnenberg, passing the title around like a parcel nobody wanted. But then again, wrestling was a sport nobody wanted either, especially in its interminable, never-ending matches, which produced 1,000-yard stares in its fans. Wow. Wrestling goes to college. We have another WrestleMania sidebar. Let's get on to the WrestleMania sidebar. Despite the depression, Jim Londos became the big draw, pulling in gates of $70,000 in Yankee Stadium versus Ray Steele in 1931. $60,000 in Fenway Park versus Ed Don George in 1934. And $86,000 versus Strangler Lewis at Wrigley Field in 1934, the largest gate since Gotch and Hackenschmidt in 1911. I find this stuff fascinating. I hope you are following along with what I am putting out here on the content, because it really is tremendous, and the information and how it correlates to today even though this book was written over 20 years ago. It starts off back in the 18th century, and we go into the 19th century through the early 1900s, and here we are in the 20s and 30s, where they're at Wrigley Field and Fenway Park and Yankee Stadium, legendary places, and they're drawing 70, 60, 80,000, $90,000 as the full gate. Could you imagine, compared to even when I was around in the 60s and 70s, when I was born in the 60s, and becoming a fan in the 70s and 80s, and being introduced to the business and the paydays and what it's like now? I was just an independent contractor, and that's what I say on all my social media platforms. Never signed a contract, pro wrestling manager, who wore every hat you can think of. That's why the relevance of the book. But again, could you imagine what it's like today? I was never in the pros like that. Worked with all the pros. But that's the money from the 20s and the 30s and the history and the book of what it's presented in this sport and industry, and those who paved the way. The pertinency of what goes around actually comes around. I'm not trying to be Justin Timberlake or is that Usher. I'm not sure who it was. I will say one thing. How about Bad Bunny? That's right, Bad Bunny, the Boricua, Bad Bunny. He will be on Saturday Night Live tonight. A lot of people have been talking about the pop culture star, Latino singer, unbelievable talent, Bad Bunny, who has stepped into the ring a couple of times. And I've been hearing it all over the radio, his T-shirts and his record. And he was, long well known all over the world. Maybe not so much in North America, but you know him now. He will be on Saturday Night Live tonight. Bad Bunny, who's been all over the WWE, the Latin sensation pop star. So watch that and check that out tonight. Speaking of carnies and sideshows and history and people that have been involved, I don't know what made that pop into my head, along with maybe the green room with Avi Klein. Check that out first on Wrestling with Anything But podcast at 9 o'clock. Avi Klein and all the perps over there on the green room, Facebook Live. And then go over and watch Bad Bunny. Listen, I'm not a Saturday Night Live fan anymore. I was from the back to the beginning, 70s and 80s, even into the 90s. Heck, even to the early 2000s. But man, over the last 5-10 years especially has that show changed. But Bad Bunny's on tonight. So maybe I'll get the rub from Bad Bunny. A lot of people have been talking about it. I figured I'd bring it up too. Bad Bunny here on down at the bunker at Chaos Corner. I don't have Bad Bunny around anywhere. I do have the wife's mold that we made an appearance on yesterday's show. I know I'm getting off topic here. It is a complete idiot's guide, the wife's mold. I'm coming up, sweetheart. Don't get mad. Come on. She's standing over by the corner. She never misses a show. Hey, listen, I made it for you. What are you going to do? Listen, we're coming up on almost an hour. I know I got sidetracked on Bad Bunny. But talking about the money and the venues and the history, it's legendary. It goes way back, fans. All right, let's see what's going on here to wrap up the show. Wrestling goes to college. Captain Lou remembers. Wrestling's first showman. Where do we go here, fans? Wrestling goes to college. Talks about the 30s. Jumpin' Joe Savoldi of Notre Dame. Let's go to college before we wrap it up here on Live to Tape, show number 37 of Chaos Corner. I ran out of the halls. We're going to wrap it up here. Wrestling goes to college. As we still here on A Brief History of Wrestling, chapter number 2. We're going to be doing this almost every day, fans. It's going to be unbelievable. Let's wrap up show number 37 here. Thank you all for being here. Follow me on social media. You know I greatly appreciate it. Go over to my boys for the rub. Don't you dare miss it. Let's go to college. And so the promoters tried several innovations to lure the fans, including putting the time limit on the matches of 10 to 15 minutes. In an effort to liven up the sport, much as baseball introduced the lively ball in 1930, it wasn't just in the 1990s. To increase the sport's offense, Promoters also started scheduling novelty bouts, women's wrestling, tag teams, and even mud wrestling. Wrestling goes to college here on Chaos Corner. But the biggest innovation was to recruit a new breed of wrestler, former collegiate football stars. In an attempt to capitalize on their names and popularity, the first of this new breed was Wayne Big Munn, a lineman from the University of Nebraska back in 1920. By the 1930s, Gus Sonnenberg of Dartmouth and the University of Detroit, Jumping Joe Savoldi, a la, we know the connection of Mario Savoldi afterwards, of Notre Dame and ICCW in the Sports Channel Northeast New England area, the Savaldis. So Jumping Joe Savoldi of Notre Dame, wrestling goes to college back here in the 1930s, Herman Hickman of Tennessee, and Bronco Nagurski of the University of Minnesota, and the Chicago Bears, obviously, all left the gridiron for the wrestling arena. Wow. But the addition of Nagurski, Hickman, and the rest of the collegiate greats was not enough to turn wrestling's fortunes around. As the hand of the Great Depression closed her all-enveloping fingers around the nation's wallet, wrestling, like all other forms of entertainment, continued to suffer. Compared to today, how AEW and WWE and other groups like now MLW and Ring of Honor and Impact have all strived and survived through this. So there is hope. We're over an hour, so I'm going to have to wrap this up. But do you see how history goes around and what happens and why this book is like the Bible? No pun intended on A Complete Idiot's Guide. This is like the Bible of pro wrestling. Captain Lou Albano, Bert Randolph Sugar. What we're talking about here on yesterday's show, number 36, today's show, number 37, moving on to number 38, 39, and 40. We'll be here every day covering this. This is history. This is what it's all about. This is where you learn and pave the way and give back to this business out of love, dedication, and passion because you want to and you enjoy it. That's what I stress here. Wrapping around the nation's wallet, wrestling, like all other forms of entertainment, continued to suffer. As I said, not so today. We're coming out of this. Wrestling's fortunes didn't improve throughout World War II. Those who wanted wrestling in the proverbial worst way got just what they asked for. Promoters combined the country signing babes in swaddling cloths, throwing nets over anybody this side of the Undertaker to fill its depleted ranks. But wrestling was on the cusp of a monumental breakthrough, courtesy of a newfangled household appliance. Anyone? Anyone? No, not the toaster. No, not the microwave. I said it earlier. The television. That changed the game of the world of professional wrestling. That is the perfect thing to end show number 37 on. As we move through the history of A Complete Idiot's Guide to the World of Pro Wrestling, Bert Randolph Sugar, Captain Lou Albano. We're on Chapter 2, A Brief History of Pro Wrestling. We started off in the 18th century, went through the early 1900s into the 20s and 30s, Wrigley Field, Fenway Park, Madison Square Garden. Now it's Strangler, Lewis, Gotch, Hackenschmidt. We talked about them all. Now we talked about hookers, shooters, carnies. We talked about everything here on show number 37. Moving forward, we are now talking about the television being introduced to the world of pro wrestling. Stay tuned. Stay with me on Chaos Corner. I greatly appreciate it. We will be back to cover this. I just want to say I am the guardian of chaos. I do tell it like it is. I am down here at the bunker. And I'll say that to say this. Live to tape, show number 37. Don't you dare miss it.